You already know the feeling. The way a single, unanswered message can reorganize your entire day. The way you check, once, then again, then one more time. Not because new information has arrived, but because your nervous system cannot tolerate the not knowing. The way a conversation you care about replays in your head at 2 in the morning, and you run it forward and backward, looking for the version where it lands right. That's not passion. That's not depth of feeling. That is a specific kind of suffering. And it has a specific name. There's a line in Baruch Spinoza's Ethics that most people have never encountered, hidden in the preface to Part 4, stated with the precision of a mathematical proof. I call servitude the human impotence to govern and restrain the affects. For the man subjected to affects is not master of himself, but is under the power of fortune, to such an extent that he is often forced to follow the worse, although he sees the better before him. Not a weakness, not sensitivity, not loving too much. Servitude, a structural condition in which your internal state has been handed over to something outside your control. A result, a response, a confirmation that things are going the direction they need to go. This is what caring too much actually is. Not an excess of feeling, but a transfer of power. Every time you make your equilibrium conditional on a specific outcome happening in a specific way, you stop being the origin of your own actions. You become a variable in someone else's equation. You react, you monitor, you push and interpret and over-explain. And the worst part, the part Spinoza saw with brutal clarity, is that this state doesn't produce better outcomes. It distorts them. The very need communicates itself, and what communicates need repels the thing it's reaching for. Forget everything the self-help world has told you about this. There's no 5-step detachment protocol here, no instructions on how to care less. What you're about to encounter is something stranger and more demanding than that. A precise account of why the wanting itself becomes the obstacle, and what it actually means to act from your own nature rather than from the anxiety of its absence. Stay with me for the next few minutes. What you're about to understand has been operating underneath every relationship you've strained, every opportunity you've overpressed, every result you've wanted so badly you poisoned your own chances of getting it. What if the problem was never how much you care, but the form that caring took? Here is a distinction most people never learn to make. There is a difference between feeling something and being governed by it. Spinoza built his entire moral psychology around this line. In the definitions that open Part 3 of the Ethics, he drew a boundary between two fundamentally different modes of existing in the world. We are active, he wrote, when what happens in us follows from our own nature, when we are the adequate cause of our states. We are passive when what happens in us is produced by forces outside us, forces of which we are only a partial cause. And the emotional consequences of these two modes are categorically different. Actions of the mind, Spinoza wrote, arise only from adequate ideas. Passions depend only on inadequate ones. What does this mean in the language of a Tuesday afternoon? It means there's a particular version of wanting, specific, recognizable, and almost universally mistaken for intensity, in which you are no longer the source of what you're doing. You are the effect. Someone doesn't respond the way you needed, and the next 4 hours of your thinking are no longer yours. A project you care about hits resistance, and suddenly every decision you make passes through the filter of that resistance rather than through your own judgment. You are still moving, still acting, still producing output. But the origin isn't you. It's the gap between what is and what you need to be true. This is what Spinoza called a passive passion, an emotional state in which external events have assumed control of your internal condition. And the critical thing to understand is that the suffering this produces is not incidental. It is structural. When your equilibrium depends on a specific outcome, every piece of incoming information becomes a threat assessment. You are no longer reading reality. You are interrogating it. You are looking for signs. And the moment you are looking for signs, you have already lost access to the clear perception that good decisions require. Watch for the specific moment when this happens to you. It doesn't arrive as drama. It arrives as a subtle tightening, a narrowing of attention onto one thing, one person, one result. You'll notice it in your body before your mind names it, a kind of holding, as if the breath is waiting for permission to complete itself. That moment, right there, is the moment you have crossed from active to passive. You have not stopped caring. You have started needing. And those are not the same thing. The distinction matters practically, immediately, right now. Because you cannot think clearly from inside a need. You cannot read a person accurately when their response is the condition of your stability. You cannot make a sound decision about a situation you are desperate to resolve. The inadequate idea, the confusing of what you want with what must happen, does not just color your perception. According to Spinoza, it constitutes it. You are not seeing the situation anymore. You are seeing your need for the situation to be otherwise. There is something you can do with this today. The next time you notice that familiar tightening, the monitoring, the checking, the replaying, don't try to stop caring. Instead, ask yourself one question. Am I acting from what I actually know, or from what I need to be true? That question does something specific. It doesn't remove the feeling. It restores you, briefly, as the one asking it rather than the one being driven by it. That brief restoration is not the destination, but it is the first movement back toward being the cause rather than the effect. What Spinoza discovered, though, is that this distinction between active and passive goes deeper than a single moment of clarity. It touches something he considered the most fundamental drive in all of existence, and the way that drive can be turned, without your noticing, against itself. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Every living thing pushes to continue, not as a choice, not as a strategy, as its most basic expression of existing at all. Spinoza named this the conatus, the effort by which each thing strives to persevere in its own being. In Proposition the 6 of Part 3 of the Ethics, he stated it with the flatness of something self-evident. Each thing, as far as it can by its own power, strives to persevere in its being. And then, in Proposition the 7th, the sentence that makes this more than biology, the striving by which each thing strives to persevere in its being is nothing other than the actual essence of that thing. Read that carefully. The conatus is not something you have. It is what you are. Your drive to persist, to act, to expand your capacity to exist. This is not a feature of your personality. It is the definition of you as a living thing, which makes what happens next so precise as a description of damage. When you care too much, in the Spinozist sense, when you have made your equilibrium conditional on an external result, the conatus does not disappear. It redirects. Instead of expressing itself as genuine action, as expansion from within, it collapses inward into monitoring, into waiting, into the anxious measurement of distance between where things are and where they need to be. The energy that would have moved outward from your own nature is now entirely absorbed by the question of whether something outside you will cooperate. You are still striving, but you are striving toward a condition rather than from an essence. And those two directions produce completely different lives. You have felt the difference, even if you never had language for it. There are moments when you work on something, and the work itself is the ground you're standing on. You're not checking how it's being received, not calculating whether it will land, not rehearsing how you'll respond to the response. You are just doing what you are. The output is different in those moments. The decisions are cleaner. The communication lands without the static of what you need it to accomplish. That is conatus moving in its natural direction, outward from your own nature, as adequate cause, And then there are the other moments, the ones where you are technically doing the same thing, sending the same message, making the same effort, showing up to the same situation. But something underneath has shifted. Now you need it to work. And that need, invisible to everyone including yourself, changes the quality of everything. Not because you've become less capable, but because your capacity is no longer fully yours. Part of it is being held hostage by the outcome. Ask yourself this: when you think about something you've been pressing too hard on, a relationship, a project, a result you've been willing into existence, what is the specific thing you are afraid would be true about you if it doesn't happen? Not what you'd lose, what it would mean. That question goes to the root. Because the passive passion is never really about the outcome. It is always about an inadequate idea underneath the outcome, a conclusion about your worth, your safety, your place, that the outcome was supposed to resolve. The striving was never toward the thing. It was away from what the absence of the thing would confirm. Spinoza's insight here is almost unbearably precise. The conatus turned against itself doesn't look like weakness from the outside. It looks like intensity. It looks like commitment. It looks sometimes like the most alive version of you. But it is the version most thoroughly under the power of something it cannot control. And the more energy it pours into that control, the further it moves from the only ground from which real action is possible, your own nature. Meeting the world without making the world's response a condition of your survival. What Spinoza called this condition, laid out with cold clarity in the opening of Part 4, is not a psychological pattern or a bad habit. It is something older and harder than that. I call servitude the human impotence to govern and restrain the affects. Spinoza opens Part 4 of the Ethics with that sentence, and then immediately clarifies what he means by impotence. Not that the man subjected to his passions lacks intelligence or willpower or good intentions. He sees the better path. He chooses the worse one anyway. The tragedy Spinoza is describing is not ignorance. It is a structural condition in which the gap between knowing and doing has been permanently occupied by something the person cannot, from inside that condition, control. This is not a metaphor for weakness. It is a technical description of what happens when your internal state has been outsourced to external events, and it maps onto the experience of caring too much with a precision that should stop you cold. Think about the last time you were in this state with something that mattered to you. You knew, with complete clarity, that the checking was making it worse, that the over-explaining was eroding exactly the impression you wanted to create, that the tight, effortful quality of your attention was communicating the opposite of ease, of confidence, of someone whose equilibrium doesn't depend on this particular thing going right. You knew all of it, and you did it anyway, not because you forgot, because knowing was not enough. The affect was stronger than the knowledge. The passive passion had more force than the adequate idea. That is servitude, precisely as Spinoza defined it. Seeing the better, following the worse, not from stupidity, but from a condition of internal dependence that knowledge alone cannot dissolve. What makes Spinoza's diagnosis different from everything that came before, and from most of what has come since, is that he refused to moralize it. He was not interested in why you should stop living this way. He was interested in the mechanics of why you can't, and what would have to change for that to be different. The answer he arrived at was not discipline, not willpower, not a practice of detachment. It was something he called adequate knowledge, a form of understanding so precise, so internally anchored, that it actually shifts the structure of the affect rather than fighting it from outside. Here is what this looks like when it becomes practical. Most attempts to stop caring too much are wars of suppression. You try to feel less. You try to redirect the attention. You remind yourself that the outcome doesn't define you, that you'll be fine either way, that you've survived worse. These moves fail, reliably, repeatedly, because they are engaging the passive passion at the level of content. They are arguing with what you feel rather than understanding the structure underneath it. Spinoza's approach goes one level deeper. Not, stop wanting this outcome, but understand precisely what part of your internal equilibrium you have made contingent on this outcome, and why. There is a specific practice inside this. When you notice you are in the passive state, monitoring, needing, over-invested in a result, identify the condition. Not the outcome itself, but the internal condition that the outcome was supposed to secure. Say it plainly to yourself, without softening it. If this doesn't happen, I will have confirmed that. And finish the sentence honestly. Most people can't finish it, because finishing it requires naming something they have been arranging their behavior around not having to name. But the moment you name it, the moment the passive passion becomes an object of clear perception rather than an invisible motor driving your actions, something begins to shift. Not because naming it removes it, because naming it restores you, partially, as its observer rather than its instrument. This is the beginning of what Spinoza meant by freedom. Not the absence of effect, not indifference. The capacity to know what is happening inside you with enough clarity that you are no longer entirely its effect. The man who is free, in Spinoza's sense, still feels, still wants, still cares about outcomes, but his caring no longer holds his equilibrium hostage. He acts from his own nature rather than from the anxiety of its potential negation. And the paradox, the one that takes time to fully absorb, is that this shift does not produce less engagement with the world, it produces more. Because the energy that was being consumed by the surveillance, the controlling, the constant adjustment to incoming signals, returns. And what it returns as is the thing that passive passion was trying to create all along, but could never manufacture by force. Spinoza had a very specific account of how that return happens. And it begins not with effort, but with something that looks, at first, like nothing more than understanding. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Suppression is not resolution. You already know this. Every time you have tried to stop caring about something by deciding to stop caring about it, you have discovered that the decision and the affect operate on entirely different tracks. The decision lives in language. The affect lives somewhere older. And the older thing does not respond to instructions. Spinoza understood this with a precision that most philosophers of his era, and most therapists of ours, have not matched. In Proposition 3 of Part 5 of the Ethics, he wrote something that reads, on first encounter, like a riddle. An affect which is a passion ceases to be a passion as soon as we form a clear and distinct idea of it. And the corollary that follows is even sharper. An affect is more within our power, and the mind suffers less from it, the better we know it. Not suppress it, not overcome it, know it. The distinction matters enormously because it points toward a completely different relationship with the states that govern you. Spinoza is not saying that understanding makes the feeling disappear. He is saying something structurally more interesting, that a passion, a passive state, a condition in which you are the effect of something external, transforms its own nature when it becomes the object of adequate knowledge. The same energy that was driving you reactively begins, through precise comprehension, to return to you as something you can actually work with. The passion does not vanish. It changes category. It moves from something happening to you towards something you are capable of understanding, and therefore, to some degree, directing. What does a clear and distinct idea of a passive passion actually look like? It is not reflection in the loose sense, not the general awareness that you are anxious, or the vague acknowledgement that you care too much about this particular thing. Spinoza's clear and distinct has a specific meaning, an idea that grasps its object through its causes, that understands not just what is happening but why, tracing the affect back to its actual structure rather than its surface expression. Applied to the experience of caring too much, this means something concrete. It means identifying not just that you are over-invested in an outcome, but the precise internal architecture of that investment. What the outcome is standing in for, what earlier condition it is trying to resolve, what the specific shape of the fear underneath it is. Most people, when they try to examine their own anxious wanting, stop at the first layer. I want this to work out. That is not a clear and distinct idea. That is the surface. One level down. I want this to work out because if it doesn't, something will be confirmed about me that I cannot tolerate. Closer. But still not precise enough to produce the shift Spinoza is describing. The clear and distinct idea requires you to go all the way to the bottom of it, to name, without softening, the specific belief that the outcome was recruited to disprove, the specific version of yourself you are running from, the specific sentence you have been arranging your behavior to prevent from being true. When you get there, and you will know when you get there because something in the body releases slightly, the way a muscle unclenches when you finally press directly on the knot rather than the surrounding area, something changes, not dramatically, not instantly, but the passive passion loses some of its opacity. It becomes visible to you. And what is visible to you is no longer entirely in control of you. Try this now with something specific. Think of the situation in your life where you are most obviously caring too much. The one where you check, monitor, over-explain, or hold your breath waiting for a signal. Don't try to feel less about it. Instead, ask, what is the worst thing this outcome not going my way would confirm? Not what would happen externally. What would be confirmed internally? Finish that sentence with the actual answer, not the diplomatic version. Sit with it for 30 seconds without arguing with it or reassuring yourself against it. That moment of undefended looking, that is the beginning of the clear and distinct idea. That is the first movement from passive to active. Not because you have solved anything, but because you have stopped being governed by something you could not see. Spinoza's insight here converges with something that practitioners of every serious psychological tradition have rediscovered independently, that the affect which is examined with genuine precision loses force, while the affect that is suppressed, avoided, or fought gains it. The passive passion feeds on opacity. It lives in the space between what you are feeling and what you are willing to know about what you are feeling. The moment that space collapses, the moment the affect becomes fully visible, fully named, held in a clear and distinct idea, it begins, slowly and irreversibly, to change. This is not the end of the work. It is the beginning of a different kind of engagement with the world. One where what you bring to a situation is no longer contaminated by what you need the situation to return. The misunderstanding is almost universal. If you stop needing the outcome so badly, you will stop trying so hard. Detachment, in the popular imagination, looks like elegant withdrawal. The person who no longer fully shows up because they have learned not to care whether they win. That is not what Spinoza described. That is not what happens. What Spinoza called active affect is not reduced engagement. It is an engagement from a different origin. The person acting from adequate ideas, from their own nature, as adequate cause, is not less committed to the work. They are more fully present to it, precisely because their attention is no longer divided between the task and the surveillance of its reception. The energy consumed by monitoring, adjusting, and triangulating between action and desired response becomes available for the action itself. That difference in available energy is not subtle. It shows up in the quality of everything. Think about the conversations you have had where you needed nothing from the other person, where you were not managing an impression or steering toward a conclusion. There is a particular quality of presence in those exchanges, a looseness, an actual curiosity, a willingness to say the true thing rather than the strategic thing. The other person feels it. They open, not because you performed trustworthiness, but because the absence of need created a spaciousness that made genuine contact possible. That is active affect. That is what Spinoza meant by acting from your own nature. Now think about the conversations where you needed something. A significant portion of your attention was occupied by how this was landing. You were reading signals rather than listening, and the other person felt that too. Not you exactly, but the weight of your need pressing against them. The almost universal human response to that weight is to pull back, not from you, but from the pressure of being responsible for your internal state. This is the mechanism Spinoza's framework makes visible. The passive passion doesn't just drain you, it actively produces the opposite of what it's reaching for. The anxious wanting communicates itself, and what communicates need creates distance in exactly the domains where you are trying to create closeness. The transition from passive passion to active affect is not a decision made once and held forever. It is a practice of returning, repeatedly, to adequate ideas about what is happening inside you. Each time you trace the need back to its actual structure, rather than fighting it at the surface, you incrementally restore yourself as the origin of your own actions. And the practical consequence, the one that sounds paradoxical until you have experienced it, is that you tend to produce better results than when you needed those results more desperately. Not because the universe rewards detachment, because adequate ideas produce adequate actions, and adequate actions shape reality more effectively than anxious ones. What organizes itself is not the external world bending to accommodate you. It is you, finally acting as a coherent cause rather than a fragmented effect, meeting the world with enough clarity that it can respond to what you actually are, rather than to the static of what you need. There is a version of this idea that gets flattened into a motivational slogan: care less, achieve more. Detach from outcomes, trust the process, release your grip. It is not wrong, exactly, but it is shallow enough to be useless, because the problem was never the act of caring, and the solution was never less of it. What Spinoza actually saw is that the suffering produced by caring too much is not a problem of intensity, it is a problem of structure. You are not feeling too much, you are feeling from the wrong position. The want is real. The investment is real. What is constructed, what produces the distortion, is the belief that your internal coherence depends on a specific external event confirming it. That belief is the passive passion at its deepest level, and it is almost never examined directly, because examining it requires admitting something most people spend considerable energy avoiding. That underneath the wanting is a question about yourself you have been trying to answer through outcomes rather than through understanding. Not will this work. But what does needing this so badly say about where my stability actually lives? Spinoza would not have softened this. Freedom, in his framework, is not a feeling, it is a capacity. To be the adequate cause of your own states rather than their passive recipient. And that capacity is not granted by circumstances going well. It is built, slowly, through the accumulation of clear and distinct ideas about your own interior. Every time you trace a passive passion back to its structure instead of fighting it at the surface, the conatus moves in its natural direction again, outward from your own nature, meeting the world without making the world's response a condition of your survival. The things that were not working were not failing because you didn't care enough. They were failing, in part, because the caring had taken a form that introduced a distortion into everything it touched. Remove the distortion, and you don't become someone who wants less. You become someone whose wanting no longer interferes with their capacity to act. This is what Spinoza meant by beatitude, not the relief of getting what you wanted, but something quieter. the state of a mind that understands itself clearly enough to act from its own nature. It does not arrive as an event. It arrives as a gradual shift in where you are standing when you engage with the world. You will still want things. You will still care whether they happen. But the next time you notice the tightening, the monitoring, the held breath, the anxious computation of signals, you will have something Spinoza spent his life trying to give people. Not a technique for feeling less, but a precise account of what is actually happening, and why understanding it is the only thing that has ever moved anyone from servitude towards something that deserves to be called free. If this video landed somewhere real for you, the one on your screen right now will go further. Click to keep watching.